The war against the censors and would-be totalitarians has reached a tipping point. Those who would shut us down, shut us up is more like it, are on the back foot, but they are not yet out of the fight, not by a long chalk. Now is the time when all efforts to put them back in their box must be intensified. Investigative journalist Michael Shellenberger this week published an article headlined "Obama's CIA Director plots global censorship as Germany and Brazil intensify their crackdown on free speech." He wrote, "Over the last few months, we have documented the global backlash to the censorship industrial complex, culminating in a series of major political and institutional defeats for its architects. In the United States, Donald Trump's election marked a decisive repudiation of state-sponsored censorship, followed swiftly by executive orders cutting off federal funding for so-called misinformation initiatives, including National Science Foundation grants. Trump also cut funding for USAID, a key funder of international censorship networks, and threatened to restrict travel to the US by foreign nationals involved in speech suppression efforts abroad. And last year, Australia rejected sweeping online censorship laws, while Ireland's government shelved its hate speech legislation after fierce public opposition. But now, the censorship industrial complex is regrouping around the world, plotting a return to power." End quote. More and more of us have seen the censorship for what it is, which is the last line of attack for would-be totalitarians who have utterly lost the argument and therefore have only bullying and threats left as their means to get their way. Shellenberger reports that Brazil's Supreme Court seeks to force media platforms to preemptively censor hate speech or anything deemed anti-democratic. That such terms, hate speech, anti-democratic, are only in the eye of the beholder is obvious. Who gets to say what's hateful? Who gets to say what's anti-democratic? Shellenberger wrote, "The court also ruled that platforms will be held jointly liable for posts retroactively deemed illegal, pressuring them to act as private censors and remove content by default. Left-wing activist groups can exploit this system by flooding platforms with takedown demands, creating a para-state censorship regime." Also yesterday and the day before, the former CIA Director under President Barack Obama, John Brennan, joined a closed-door meeting of the Law Society of Ireland's Centre for Justice and Law Reform, alongside other figures with deep ties to law enforcement and intelligence networks. The gathering made clear that Western elites are actively coordinating efforts to rebrand and revive the censorship agenda under the banner of legal reform, even as public backlash has slowed their progress elsewhere.
Hello, I'm Bev Turner. Now, it can feel like the money in our bank accounts at the moment does not keep up with the cost of living, and maybe there's a solution. I'm here today with the CEO of TallyMoney, Cameron Parry. Cameron, what is TallyMoney?
Well, Bev, with TallyMoney, you get a current account and a debit card, but instead of pounds, you use milligrams of gold as your everyday money.
So why gold?
Gold traditionally is a great store of value. It has, on average, gone up at over 11% per annum for the last 25 years against the pound. It's tripled in value in the last decade. And in the last 2 years alone, it's increased by 50% against the pound. Banks' savings products just can't compete with that level of growth.
But this isn't just about gold. This is about a currency that you guys have created at TallyMoney. Explain it to me as though I'm an idiot.
So, look, people need to be able to hold their earnings and build their savings in a money that retains its value and remains in their legal control and remains theirs to access, away from government control.
Great. You had me at not exposed to government control.
You should feel safe and happy with your money. You should have peace of mind. The more money you see in your bank balance, and that's the type of thing we're trying to deliver, and give people choice in the type of money they get to use every day.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you.
Those of us who want governments and their little wizards to butt out of our lives should have our tails well and truly up by now. Almost every day we see around us decent people who just want the freedom to raise their families and pursue useful, meaningful lives, free from the prying eyes of would-be totalitarians who blatantly look on at those who do not need them, who do not want them. Just regular, decent people who demand the independence to decide for themselves what is right, who they will listen to, and so draw their own conclusions about the world around them. Shellenberger wrote, "The momentum is still behind the free speech movement as recent victories show a growing public and political revolt against censorship." But the desperate fight back by the censorship industrial complex, made clumsily obvious most recently in Brazil and also in Germany, where the recent disgrace was the arrest by the authorities there of 170 citizens for spreading hate speech and misinformation. All the would-be totalitarians have left is what I describe as the blatantly transparent insistence that all their efforts to silence and censor are in the name of public safety. Online publication Reclaim the Net carried a story this week headlined, "Supreme Court greenlights online digital ID checks." Quote, "With a landmark ruling that could shape online content regulation for years to come, the US Supreme Court has upheld Texas's digital ID age verification law for adult websites and platforms, asserting that the measure lawfully balances the state's interest in protecting minors with the free speech rights of adults. The 6-3 decision, issued on June 27, 2025, affirms the constitutionality of House Bill 1181, a statute that requires adult websites to verify the age of users before granting access to sexually explicit material. Laws like House Bill 1181, framed as necessary safeguards for children, are quietly eroding the rights of adults to access lawful content or speak freely online without fear of surveillance or exposure. Under such laws, anyone seeking to view legal adult material online, and eventually even those who want to access social media platforms that may contain content harmful to minors, is forced to provide official identification, often a government-issued digital ID or even biometric data to prove their age. Over and over again, we see the determination to monitor every moment of our lives dressed up in the crowd-pleasing insistence that it's only about protecting children. But it's by these means, being given an inch and then taking a yard or a mile, that freedom is first eroded and then stolen altogether. Quote, "Supporters claim this is a small price to pay to shield minors from harmful content. Yet these measures create permanent records linking individuals to their browsing choices, exposing them to unprecedented risks." Close quote. Then Reclaim the Net wrote, "But while the Texas law targets platforms that have 1/3 or more adult material, other states are pushing broader laws, pushing for digital ID to access social media platforms that pose wider levels of harm to minors. The goal is for all access to social media to require digital ID age verification. The X platform to this date allows adult material." Close quote. It's in this way that the line between safety and censorship is deliberately blurred. Shellenberger reports how the European Union's Digital Services Act is already biting, granting sweeping powers to unelected regulators to demand content takedowns, reorder algorithms, and impose platform-wide penalties across the continent. Again, I say, now is the time to have our tails up, but also to be aware more than ever that the censorship industrial complex is redoubling its efforts, even in the face of rising popular opposition to all the push for totalitarian control. More and more the people are on their feet declaring they want no more intrusion into their lives, intrusion dressed up as being for their own good to protect the children. Shellenberger wrote, "In 2023, 70% of Democrats supported government efforts to combat misinformation. Today, that number has fallen to 58%. The decline is even sharper among independents and conservatives, many of whom now view censorship not as a safeguard, but as a political weapon. There is evidence that the censors knew they were crossing ethical and legal lines, and thus opened their efforts up to backlash and proceeded anyway. For anyone who has paid attention in the past few years, some of the worst episodes of misinformation have come from the authorities. Politicians at their podiums, public health representatives, mainstream media all demonstrably pushed information during the COVID era that later proved false or misleading. Consider the official insistence that the jabs would stop transmission, even when freely available information proved that claim was groundless. In the US in 2020, the mainstream media relentlessly pushed the line that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, and then had to admit, albeit after the election that put Daddy Joe Biden in the White House, that the laptop, or indeed laptops, were full of undeniably damaging but authentic information about Hunter Biden and his family. And remember when the mainstream media shouted from the rooftops about the best version of Biden, only for it to become clear that many of those same people had been aware of the man's cognitive decline for years. And for all that, and more official misinformation besides, consequences are there none. If those of us determined to retain freedom, freedom of speech included, do not redouble our own efforts now, the war will yet be lost. We've come so far, and yet the threat remains that decent people, knowing the truth, are so bullied and rattled by the efforts of the censorship industrial complex that they will simply and finally stop speaking for fear of crackdowns by their governments. The war will yet be won, but only with our voices raised in unison.